Hi guys, Dr. Philip again. This lecture will be on the application process. Looks like we're getting close to the end of the semester, and I know that your resume assignment is due at the end of this week on the 12th because of a couple of postponements. Again, don't worry about if you have enough stuff, or don't worry about if you're feeling self-conscious that you can't include certain categories. The resume exercise is in many ways really geared towards helping you get that process started, recognize where your strengths are and your relative weaknesses are, and help you find ways to start getting the other pieces in place. So if you need to do research for grad school, how do you go about doing that? Recognizing that now. If you want to get some volunteer work experience, how do you go about doing that? Okay. Today's topic is the application process. This is kind of looking to put things together. Now, generally speaking, this is applying for graduate school. However, we're also going to talk about some correlates about applying for jobs. As far as graduate school goes, we have what I call the usual suspects, and those are the common pieces that you're going to need to address in order to get the job. The first is your GPA, okay, and this is going to be helpful for jobs as well. How do you go about making sure that you include your GPA on your resume or vita, depending if you're looking for a job or for graduate school? And how do you go about calculating it? Okay. As we've talked about before, you can calculate your overall GPA, which is the standard one that you usually get off of a transcript or something along those lines. But you can also calculate your GPA within your major. So in psychology, you can calculate your GPA for your upper division, which would be the last, well, any credits beyond 60, or when you've gotten your AA or your kind of added into candidacy. And that could also, you can also think of it anything you've taken after your sophomore year, after you know, or in your junior and senior years, however long that takes. Now, for a job, it's not quite as important. Most of the time, they want to know, do you have the degree? But if your GPA is reasonably strong, that's something that you can certainly include. Again, it doesn't usually for a job. It's not going to matter as much that you calculate these additional GPAs. It's going to be your overall GPA that's probably important in that case. So, but for graduate school, probably a good idea to calculate all three of them. You may or may not want to add an additional one. For those of you who may want to go on to doctoral work, as we've talked about before, you might not have the credentials at this point in time. When you're if you go to a master's program, and when you're in master's program, that will be a separate GPA, and I would calculate that as a graduate GPA, which would be different than an undergraduate GPA. Okay. Second thing, GREs, not particularly important for work, but for graduate school will usually be critical. And just as a review, we've talked about this before, you have kind of two GREs to consider. The first is what we call the general test, and that is very similar in layout to the SAT. So you're going to have a quantitative or math section, you're going to have a verbal or an English section, very much like you did in the SAT. There's the third section in the GRE referred to as the analytics section or the analytical section. That has changed over the years. It's been things like logic games, it's been scenarios, they've had it as a written component. The truth is that while they include the analytic component, very few programs will emphasize that. And I don't mean in psychology, I mean just period. If you're going into physics or certain areas of engineering, they may look at that as being an important component. But most of the time, your general GRE is going to be evaluated on your verbal and quantitative. So it's kind of out of 1600 as it was with the SAT. If you're looking for master's level work, again, as just a review, you're looking at a GPA of about a 3.2 or better, and GREs of about 1,000 or better. If you're going to be lower on one, you should be higher in the next. And if you're going to be looking at doctoral work, you're looking at 3.5 minimum for a GPA and 1200 minimum for GREs. Again, if you're going to be low on one, you should be higher on the other. The truth of the matter is GPAs tend to vary depending on the university that you're at. And so while 3.2 for a master's and 3.5 for a doctoral degree are kind of the minimums that I indicate, if you're at Harvard, it might be a little bit different. If you're going to Bob's House of Learning, it might be a little bit different. So while I say that 3.2 and 3.5 are kind of the minimums, usually, very often the people that are applying have GPAs that are stronger than that. Probably 3.5 at the master's level and 3.7 at the doctoral level. But I think, as I mentioned this before, my GPA was a 3.5, and so it was not. I did not have a strong GPA for doctoral work, but my GREs were strong, and I had other pieces. So don't worry if one of your pieces is not particularly strong. If most of your pieces aren't particularly strong, or if you're not meeting the kind of minimum or guideline requirements for any of them, that could be difficult. There's also a second GRE called the subject test. Okay, subject tests are, so there's a GRE for psychology and a GRE for biology and a GRE for history and so on. The subject test is really only in play if you are looking to do doctoral work in psychology, and only some doctoral programs require it. Not all doctoral programs do. So if you are looking into doctoral work, whether that's in clinical or counseling or developmental or cognitive or social or neuroscience or whatever it might be, if you are looking into doctoral work for psychology, one of the questions to ask is, do you require the GRE subject test? Nowadays, most of the time, that information will be put on kind of a web page so that you can review it. Or if you request information from the program, it should be included. But sometimes it's good just to make sure. The GRE subject test for psychology will have questions on any host of areas in psychology. That's a separate test to study for. And if you don't, generally speaking, if you didn't study for the SAT or don't plan to study for the GRE General, I highly recommend that you do study for the GRE subject. Because different areas like social or developmental or clinical or what have you are going to be covered. And you want to make sure that you at least have the basic knowledge for that. The GRE General test, is, as I mentioned before, is 800 for the quantitative, for the verbal, and for the analytic, 800 each. In the GRE subject, it's 800 period, just for the psych test. So kind of, if you're in the 700s, that's really good. If you're in the 600s, that's solid. If you're in the 500s, that's pretty good. Anything below 500 becomes a little bit, probably doesn't work to your advantage. Third thing, letters of recommendation. This is going to be important whether you are applying for graduate school or for a job. Even though for a job you usually don't have to produce the letters themselves, you just need to be able to have the contact information for your references. Letters of recommendation, standard are 3. You want to have 3 references. What I would normally do is solicit 4, and that way if one person kind of craps out, you're still good to go. So I would usually recommend soliciting 4 letters. For graduate school, they're going to probably want letters from professors, although depending on if you have a work or a volunteer letter of rec, that still can be very viable, depending on what they can talk about. For jobs, professor letters are less useful because for most of the time, jobs don't mimic classwork. Now, if you do research with a professor, then that would be a good professor to have as a reference for a job. If you are part of an organization with a professor, Psychi, Psychology Club, Active Minds, as we've talked about, or other kind of entities that might be a fraternity or a service organization or a sorority or a club of some form, having a professor who kind of oversees and with whom you have worked, that can be useful. But for jobs, they're looking for people that will know you we'll know a little bit more about things like dependability and responsibility and timeliness and teamwork and those kinds of things that are going to fit more in a job. And so it's going to be previous employers. If you've done volunteer work at a site, that's also a person who can write a letter of rec on your behalf. So it's another reason to consider volunteer work. Letters of rec, hopefully, will, well, let's put it this way. When people write letters of rec for you, hopefully they're addressing the types of things that the people or places to whom you're going to be applying are going to be looking for. In other words, in graduate schools, they're going to want to know about your commitment to a particular field. They're going to want to know about the coursework you've done, the research that you've conducted with them. In a job, they're going to want to know about, as I mentioned before, dependability, reliability, consistency, timeliness, punctuality, teamwork, ability to stay on task, to complete assignments, those kinds of things. And so one of the things that we talked about in the past was providing maybe what I've referred to as a thumbnail sketch for your references. And that's just a broad overview of how they would know you. So if it's a professor, it's what course or courses you've taken with him or her, in what semester, and what grade you got. Perhaps a particular project that you may, or paper you may have written or been involved with in that course or in those courses. If you've done research with a professor, giving them an overview when that was, what the project was, because professors will often have multiple projects, research projects running. What else? If you were part of an organization that the professor oversaw or was a faculty advisor for, that could be useful. So any way that that professor is going to know you, and you can do the same thing with employers. Give them a sense of when you started at that position, at that company or that entity, how long you've been there, the different positions you've held, the different projects or different duties different projects you've been involved in or different duties you've had. So giving them an overview on those types of things, because they may not recall everything that you've done, and the truth is they may recall things about you that you don't remember. But that way, if both of you are kind of, if you're giving them a sense of how they might know you, that can help tweak their memory in certain ways. Fourth thing, program essays or personal statement. For a job, this is usually seen more as a cover letter. And we're going to talk about, in fact, after the last, one of the last, or the last lecture we'll cover is going to be kind of personal statement, personal essay, cover letter type of information. But generally speaking, one of the important things you're going to want to look at for your program essays, personal statement, or cover letter is you want to address your fit for that program or that job. And so for the graduate school side, it's not just why you should be a good fit for being a clinical psychologist or why you should gain entrance into clinical psychology, for example. It's much more of why you would be a good fit for the clinical psychology program at University of North Florida. We don't have one, but for example. And that requires you knowing a little bit about each program to which you apply. This is the same thing with jobs. You want to identify not why you would be a good fit for a sales position, but why you would be a good fit for this sales position with ABC Corporation, whatever it might be. So trying to address your fit for a position. Now, how do you do that? Well, you talk about the skills that you have, and that can be for both a job or graduate school. For graduate school, you're going to want to talk about coursework you've taken, research you've conducted. Additionally, outside of the academic realm, for both a job and graduate school, it's also going to be helpful to try and address what your career plans are and how getting this job or getting into this program will help you move towards or work towards be able to achieve those career goals that you have. If your primary goal is to work in developmental psychology, you're going to have to make the explanation as to why you want to get into a clinical psychology program. Now, if they have a strong child focus, that might be part of your reasoning. Or if you'd like to do a mix of work, well, then that would be something to address. Same thing's true in jobs. If you're looking to apply for a job after graduation, you want to explain why your training at the University of North Florida academically fits for whatever the position is for which you're applying. But you also want to learn about the company or the business to which you're applying, so that you know certain pieces about maybe the demographics, the type of population that they tend to focus on, or the product that they products that they sell or that they produce. If it's a service-based job, then the types of skills that you have, how that fits with the type of skills that are needed for the job that they have available. And so fit is a very important thing, whether it's a job application or an application for graduate school. And then the last kind of main usual suspect that I have down is resume or vita, which we covered last week, and that we have that you have your assignment coming up for soon. Again, when you're doing a job application, it's a resume, which is 1 page, and you're really going to want to focus on things like your education and your work experience. Volunteer experience can also be useful in that case. And then things like computer skills or language fluency, something along those lines. For graduate school, those are all very viable avenues. You're also going to want to touch on research experience, particularly if you're applying for doctoral work. Now, if you're applying for work outside of psychology, you're going to want to focus on the things that that particular field values. So if you want to go to law school, you're going to want to show that not only do you have a bachelor's degree, but you may have minored in history or legal studies or whatever it might be that you minored in. You may also want to show that you were part of the undergraduate pre-law society, and if you aren't, look to go ahead and do something along those lines. You might want to show that you have volunteered or worked part-time or worked over the summer in a clerk's office or for a legal firm or something along those lines. So that even if you were doing secretarial or administrative work at a law firm, you still get a sense of the flow of a law firm. You get a sense of the types of things that attorneys are often concerned with. You get a feel for legal cases even though you're not involved directly in them. So not only does it show that you gain information and experience, but it also shows a commitment to the field. Now, if that's not available, you may look to take courses with professors who have background in legal issues. And so you might want to take a couple of electives, even if it doesn't meet the muster of a minor. You can still look to take targeted courses and explain why you took those courses, because again, that shows at least thoughtfulness. So the resume was 1 page for business. The vita can be certainly more than 1 page for graduate school. Going on to a tentative timeline. I'm going to start with your junior year. One of the things you should be doing in your junior year is you should be thinking about letters of recommendation. Not that you have to procure them or secure them at that time, particularly not at the beginning of the year, but you need to start, or it behooves you to start thinking about, if I needed to get references right now, who would I look to do that with? And if you aren't sure, again, as we've talked about before, a good way to do this is to start looking at, okay, well, what professors have I taken that I've either liked his or her course, or that I really like the topic area, or I'm interested in their area of research or something along those lines. I say that because if you've taken a course with Dr. Tolia, let's say for example, or Dr. Fizak or Dr. Perez or whomever, and you liked their course, then you may want to see about taking a second course with them. The more courses you take with a professor, chances are the better they're going to know you. They may know you in a slightly broader way because each course may require different assignments or components. And the more likely they are to be able to write a better letter of recommendation on your behalf. You may also look to conduct research with a professor. That's another way for them to certainly get to know you, and as I've mentioned before, to get to know you in maybe a slightly different way than solely in kind of the coursework academic realm. You may look to become involved with an organization that a professor is involved in, so that they get to know you from the work that you do in that capacity. A few years back, I wrote a letter of recommendation for an ex-student, Liana, and she was the president of Active Minds and did a lot of excellent work for the organization. And so I was able to write a letter of rec for not only for graduate positions, but also for a grant or a scholarship that she ended up winning. And it wasn't because I wrote the letter, but I was able to write about a number of different things. Classes that she took with me. She had about 2 or 3 classes with me. And then the different projects she took on as the president of Active Minds. And so that's another way that I knew her, so I could really flesh out the letter and talk about how she helped bring people into the organization, how she worked on behalf of the organization by maintaining contact with other different organizations on campus, different projects we took on, bringing in speakers and so on. So I was really able to kind of talk about those things, and that helped in some ways me write a better letter of recommendation on her behalf. And so you want to start looking at letters of recommendation. You want to start thinking about conducting research, particularly if you want to go to graduate school. But even if you don't, again, for the letter of recommendation perspective and from learning some research tasks that may be helpful in a job, that's another reason to consider it. You want to try and take your statistics classes, all your statistics classes, and if you can, get research methods out of the way. It'd be great if you could even get a lab or both of your labs out of the way, but realistically, if you can get your research methods course done and one of your lab courses done, that would be great. If not, look to try and complete as much of that, if not all of it, by the beginning of your senior year, because those are the kinds of things that graduate schools are often looking at when you are applying for grad school. As for jobs, it's probably not as important, but what it does you can emphasize that you like to prepare ahead and that you wanted to get these courses out of the way so that you could really focus on kind of emphasizing those skills. While it may not seem like a big deal, jobs often like the idea that you look ahead and plan ahead, and that shows foresight, which is good. Fourth kind of step during the junior year, look to join an organization like Psychi or Active Minds or something along those lines, Psychology Club. Now, if you're interested in going into med school, then look to try and join like a pre-med organization. They have them for business, they have them for law, they have them for medical school, they have them for any host of areas. So look to join those organizations and get involved. Doesn't mean you have to be president of the organization, but look to get involved, because that's another line on your resume. It shows commitment to a field and foresight, as we talked about before. But you may also gain insight into the field that you didn't have, and you may want to switch gears and start tailoring your academic schedule in your senior year towards certain things. You may want to get volunteer experience in a certain area, because that would be seen as being very helpful. Fifth step, really during your junior year, really try and get a sense of what direction you want to take career-wise. Doesn't mean you have to make the final decision, but a lot of times people are still floating. They're not sure if they want to get a job or go to grad school. And if they want to go to grad school, do they want to go for psych? Do they want to go for law? Do they want to go for business? Do they want to go for English or whatever it might be? Occupational therapy, or it could mean a host of things. This is really the time to start to kind of take this on. And in that way, you want to try and maybe look at some books that kind of give you an overview of that. So, for example, the APA puts out books about graduate studies in psychology. They have them for graduate studies in law and medicine and business and all kinds of things. You may also want to talk with professors who are in that field, whether you're taking courses with them or not, to get a sense of what they do, what they really like about the job or the field, what they find challenging or dislike about the job or field, and recommendations they might have, so that you can kind of further yourself in the sense of either making a decision to do something or ruling something out. Within the psych realm, try and get a sense of, do I really want to work with hands-on with people and do something like clinical or counseling psychology in a therapeutic fashion, or am I more interested in doing research or working with people in non-therapeutic ways that may be training? So very often developmental psychologists may do different trainings for parents or prospective parents. So trying to get a sense of where within psychology you may want to go if you really believe that psych is the direction that you're interested in. If you're not interested in going to graduate school, what kind of vocation or job are you interested in? And again, part of the reason for your final assignment, which yes, I'll put up the criteria for you this week, but is so that you can investigate a career that of interest that somebody with a degree in psychology could have, but that doesn't mean it has to be a psych career. So it could be law or occupational therapy or medicine or business or whatever. So go to the Occupational Outlook Handbook for most of those things. But the Occupational Outlook Handbook can be good to help you learn more about a variety of different careers. And usually when you put in, let's say, counselor, it'll give you information about, in this case, different types of counselors probably, but at the bottom of the page it'll also give you similar or related careers. And so you can click on those and get a sense of how they're different and how that might be. You might look at a counselor and go, I'm not really interested in being a counselor, but a case manager might be something interesting for me. And you might read that and go, now that's a little bit more what I'd like to do. Additionally, use the career assessments. Now, we used e-choices, but there are other ones that the Career Services Office has to give you some information about careers. And as I mentioned, review appropriate books. If you're interested in clinical or counseling psychology, I really do emphasize the utility of the Insider's Guide, and that's on your syllabus, so you can get the actual reference for it. But the Insider's Guide to Graduate Studies in Counseling and Clinical Psychology. There are other ones. So there's one called The Complete Guide to Graduate School Admission. And they have a series of volumes. So they have one for psychology and related fields, and they have them for other, like law and business and so on. So really kind of focusing in on reviewing kind of the information out there regarding your field. Now, if it's a job that you're interested in, again, there are a couple of books on the syllabus by Sternberg, and I forget who the other one's by off the top of my head, about getting jobs in psychology. And if you're interested outside the field of psychology, there's nothing wrong with going to Career Services and asking them for leads, or going online to Barnes and Noble or Books of Bajillion or whatever it is, and just getting a sense of what kind of books are out there. Going to the library and getting a sense of what kind of books they have available, and seeing what kind of stuff you can find online as well. And then the other thing you probably should do, particularly if you're looking to go to graduate school during your junior year, is start prepping for the GRE General Test. Now you can do that on your own. You can do that by taking a Kaplan course or a Princeton Review course. They tend to be pretty popular, but they're also quite expensive. They can be well over $1,000. Now, classically, UNF has offered GRE prep courses. They usually, I think, are like Saturday mornings from like 9 to 12 or something like that for about 6 weeks. But while it seems early and it could be a pain in the ass, they also tend to be a lot cheaper, because prep courses through Kaplan or Princeton Review can run $1,200–1,500 easy, whereas classically the UNF course may have been $400 or $500. So usually, I mean, literally, it's a third of the cost, which could be a huge bonus. If you don't have that kind of money, or you don't generally want to do that kind of thing, there are a lot of different books out there that give you strategies as well as sample tests and questions to go through. Make sure to do those. Somewhere between your junior and senior year, get information from programs of interest if you're applying to graduate school, or start getting a sense of what kind of jobs might be available in your area or in certain areas where you may want to move for jobs of interest. How many programs if you're going to grad school? I'd usually say 8 is kind of a reasonably good number, but somewhere in that 6 to 12 range is probably the range you want to aim at. If you're only applying to 1 or 2 programs, you're putting your eggs in a very small number of baskets. On the flip side, if you're applying to 30 programs, each program is going to cost you probably $50 to $75 to apply. So that could get really pricey. So I usually say try to focus on that kind of mid-range, that somewhere between 6 and 12. That way you have a reasonable breadth of programs. And you may also want to consider, if you're applying for psychology, you may want to apply to a handful of doctoral, and if you're applying to doctoral programs, a handful of doctoral and some master's programs as well. If you're applying for master's programs, you might want to look to see if there are other similar master's programs that might be helpful for you.